In this video, I'll be making a 2028 presidential election prediction between Gavin Newsom and JD Vance. Obviously, this is an early prediction, and a lot of things will change before today and November of 2028, but this is an early prediction between these two candidates. Now, first off, let's look at a brief type of numbers for both these candidates. If you look at Donald Trump's current job approval rating, it's down 6.5%. While that doesn't look the best, it is notable that this is about 10 to 15% higher than when Trump was back in 2020 when he left the presidency. This is also significantly higher than Joe Biden's approval rating number, and is also higher than Kamala Harris's favorability number. If you look at JD Vance's current favorability ratings, it's roughly the same as Donald Trump. While Gavin Newsom has seen a slight increase in current approval rating numbers, it has to be said that generally, his numbers have consistently been worse than Donald Trump and JD Vance. And I do expect that after his honeymoon period kind of phases out, I do expect that Gavin Newsom will have an even lower number than JD Vance and Donald Trump. And of course, this is an early prediction. I'll first give the safe states here to both sides. For JD Vance here, these are going to be the states that I expect him to win by more than 12%. It's nothing really surprising here. It's all the states that Trump won by a safe margin. I will also include Ohio because Trump won that state by 11.2. And of course, JD Vance is from the state of Ohio, and he defeated Tim Ryan by a solid margin. South Carolina, Alaska as well. I would also give state of Florida here as safe Republican because Gavin Newsom is very critical of Trump, but Trump won the state by 13. I also don't believe that Gavin Newsom has the type of politics that is required for him to win back Hispanics in Miami-Dade County. I just don't see that happening. JD Vance is at 178 electoral college votes just in the safe states. Now we go to Gavin Newsom. Newsom will get the West Coast, where he is from. He'll get Hawaii, DC, Maryland, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I think he'll get Connecticut, he'll get Vermont, but he'll not get New York, he'll not get New Jersey, Delaware, or Illinois in the safe column in my opinion, though I will give him Maine's 1st district. This is just because some of the sharp losses Democrats have seen over the past decade or so, especially over the past 4 years. Specifically, between 2020 and 2024, the nation's rightward shift was not that apparent in some of the Rust Belt swing states, as well as Georgia, North Carolina, or even parts of the Sun Belt. However, it was very apparent in the West Coast, specifically in areas like New Jersey and New York, which shifted double digits in favor of the Republican Party. Illinois also shifted 6.1%, New Jersey, Connecticut, they all shifted by over 5%. And that's because a lot of Hispanic voters, a lot of African Americans are now a lot more in favor of the Republican Party in general, thus making this very, very difficult here for the Democrats to actually get back those margins, which don't really matter if the Democrats are not really losing the state. They won't be losing these states, but it's going to be a lot more competitive, in my opinion, over the next decade or so. And therefore, I do believe that these states will be likely Democratic, probably New York, New Jersey. New York probably D plus 10, New Jersey probably like D plus 5. It's still okay for Democrats. They don't need to worry about these states, but it's certainly not a good sign for Democrats, especially long term. I fully expect by like 2040 with population trends that the state of New York could really go Republican, but it's just not going to happen in 2028 with JD Vance a more conservative Republican nominee. Anyways, here that does bring Gavin Newsom up to 181. Colorado and Virginia will also be likely Democratic. These are trending blue states. Virginia, Republicans have a chance of making it pretty competitive, but I just believe that the state of Virginia, especially inside the suburbs, they're still very liberal. They're still blue trending. Even though Democrats did not do well out in 2024, that was because A, Kamala Harris was a weak candidate. B, she kind of entered the race late, and C, everyone was frustrated about Joe Biden, and that kind of explains why Democrats will probably start improving a little bit in Virginia, in my opinion. Now Gavin Newsom is at 204. JD Vance will obviously win Texas by a likely margin, 11-12%. I think they'll go back to Democratic Party by a little bit, just because the border issue would not be very prevalent in 2028, and that was how Republicans ran up huge margins in Texas. But otherwise, the state will still vote Republican. I think Maine's 2nd District will vote Republican. That just makes sense. It voted for Trump, I believe, by pretty much double digits, close to 10% in 2024. Now I'm going to start going to the swing states in this map. I'm going to start off here in the state of Nevada, where I do believe that it's going to be very, very difficult for Gavin Newsom to win. Even though the state does border California, it's not a state where I expect fully for the Republican Party to end up losing. For one thing, this was the first time in like 2 decades. I believe the last time Republican won Nevada was back in 2004. And Bush won the state by a smaller margin, I believe, than Trump did. So in fact, this was the best performance for a Republican in Nevada in 24 years. And that's because there's a lot of Latinos in Nevada, specifically in Clark County, and the county shifted 7% more Republican. The county is 2/3 of the state's population. Democrats cannot afford these type of numbers. Democrats can't afford to just win Clark County. They need to win it by 6 to 7, and that's not realistic at this point in time. And I think Nevada will be very close to likely Republican, probably like 4 to 5% in favor of the Republicans. I think the same can be said about the state of Arizona. I think Arizona long term is still trending Republican, Democratic, slightly. But the fact is, Kamala Harris did so horribly in Arizona. The state was expected to be close. Trump won the state by almost 6%. And Phoenix, Maricopa County, the county that's 60% of the state's population, trended Republican by 5%. Pima County trended Republican by 4%. Some of the Native American reservations trended Republican by even more. So that's concerning and alarming for the Democratic Party. I do believe that JD Vance does not have that moderate appeal as much as, maybe Trump did. And I believe that the border issue, which would fade out, would be a point in favor of the Democratic Party, but Gavin Newsom is not appealing to any moderates or Hispanics, at least in my opinion. And that's going to be also why New Mexico moves down to lean Democratic. The state voted for Harris by 6, it trended Republican by 5. This could be in play if Republicans had a very strong nominee. I think Rubio might make this state in play, especially because I just don't believe Gavin Newsom is moderate enough to win the state by a large margin and to win over those Latino voters. Specifically, if you look at Bernalillo County or Santa Fe, these were hugely Republican trending areas, and this is kind of why Democrats need to be more moderate to have any chance of winning some of these swing states and to get a good margin in New Mexico. Gavin Newsom is not that candidate. The state is leaning Democratic. Before we go to Georgia and North Carolina, I'm just going to get Maine's at-large vote and Maine's 2nd District out of the way. Maine's at-large is lean Democratic. Maine's 2nd is likely Democratic. Maine's 2nd is trending blue. Maine's at-large is trending red, but I don't believe it's going to flip. So I'm just going to get that out of the way here. Now we go to Georgia and North Carolina, which I'll group in together. Both these states voted for the Republican Party by about 3% back in 2024. Georgia by a bit less than 3, and North Carolina by a bit more than 3. Both have urban areas which are trending Democratic, with the rural areas trending more Republican. Now, the difference is in the state of Georgia here, in 2024, Democrats still had an okay showing. At least they improved a little bit in the exurbs around Atlanta. In the state of Georgia, in the North Carolina here, Democrats pretty much underperformed across the state in the rural areas, and they lost a bit of support in some of the more urban areas. I would say that Georgia is a state where Democrats have a reasonable shot of winning, although I do not believe that Gavin Newsom is the right candidate to do so. North Carolina, which was thought to be a trending blue state, is now seemingly long gone for Democrats again. They always get close to winning. They did win it in 2008. The problem is, they have not won it since 2008, and the state has actually more or less trended a little bit more to the Republican Party in recent years. And, Democrats have not had a solid performance there in a pretty long time. Even though the governor's race went to Democrats by 13, the presidential race still voted for Donald Trump by over 3%. So considering that, I would say North Carolina is leaning Republican. Georgia, there's a chance that Democrats could win it, so tilt Republican. The issue right now is for the Democratic Party is that there's still a lot of Republican support in the rural areas, and Gavin Newsom is not someone who's able to perform very well in the suburbs. He is still too far left to be able to do well in that regard. Now we go to New Hampshire. The mainstream media always tells us New Hampshire is not that competitive. The truth is, it voted for Harris by 3, which is, half of the margin that Trump won the state of Arizona by. So in fact, this state is very much in play and very much competitive. The problem here for the Republican Party is that, again, it's really not worth it for Republicans to invest that much. It's not going to make or break the election unless Gavin Newsom wins the 3 Rust Belt states. Winning New Hampshire would give the Republicans enough electoral college votes to win the election. But, that's kind of another story. The state of New Hampshire is not that important. Therefore, I do believe Gavin Newsom will still win the state. If Republicans pour a lot of funds in there, sure, J.D. Vance could win. But also, it is a white, college-educated state. That's a demographic trending away from the Republican Party. So I don't believe Republicans will invest that many resources there. Now we go to Minnesota. Minnesota has the longest Democratic voting history. It voted for Walter Mondale back in 1984, the only state to do so. And it has voted for the Democratic Party since that every single election. It has voted for Democrats consistently over the past 52 years or 13 election cycles. In other words, the state has a history of voting blue, and it's probably not going to flip. I say probably because there is a chance the state flips. The problem for the Republican Party is that the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and what's the other one again? Minneapolis and St. Paul. I just don't believe that these areas are going to trend Republican. These are very urban areas. This is 25% of the state's population. We add in the suburbs, we're over a third, and the rural areas are not red enough for the Republicans to overturn that. The urban areas also have the higher turnout, so it's going to be difficult for Republicans to do. It's certainly doable, but it's going to be difficult. And I don't believe Republicans are going to invest in the state. If they do, there's a shot. If they don't, then there's really not that big of a chance the state flips. I would still give Minnesota as lean Democratic due to its heavy African American population, which, by the way, unlike some of the southern states, did not move as much towards the Republicans in 2024. Now we go to Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin is a state that was decided by less than a point, the only state that was decided by less than a point. If you look at the state, the biggest issue for J.D. Vance would be retaining the rural support that Trump got. In my opinion, he's going to lose a little bit, which could matter in a state that was decided by just 20,000 votes. The challenge here is that, I still believe J.D. Vance has the charisma needed to win the state. It was decided by just under 30,000, but we saw that J.D. Vance was a great debater in 2024. He clearly out-debated the more experienced Tim Walz, not to mention that, he has the charisma. He does have the rural appeal. He has the right type of issues in favor of him. Therefore, I would give Wisconsin here the rural areas. I would say that J.D. Vance would still be able to do well there. I also think he'll gain in support in areas like the Wild Counties, where there were a lot of Republicans who decided that they just did not want to vote for Trump because they were quote-unquote moderate. I just don't believe that's going to happen with J.D. Vance. Not to mention that I do believe that, Gavin Newsom is not moderate enough for a lot of voters in the Wild Counties to end up voting for him, and I also don't know how well he'll turn out the urban areas. Overall, I'd say that at this point in time, J.D. Vance wins the state by 1 point to 1.5 points, so that's a tilt margin. Now we go to Michigan. Michigan, I see room where Republicans could end up, losing a little bit of support, and Democrats could gain a little bit. I definitely see that. Particularly, we're talking about Wayne County, Michigan, which is where Detroit is located. The reason that Kamala Harris lost Michigan was because she lost support in Detroit. Turnout was down in Detroit as well as Washtenaw County. And the biggest thing is the county shifted 9% Republican. Since the county's 13-14% of the state's population, that was huge. The state overall in all of the other counties averaged to trend about 2% Republican. So if Detroit also trended at about 2% Republican, Harris would have won the state by just under a point. But we all know that didn't happen. Turnout dropped a lot in the specifically more Arab American populations. Dearborn was a city, for example, that was home to about 130,000. and voted for Biden by 50 in 2020, voted for Trump by about 10% in 2024. You can see that huge trend there. I do not believe that's going to hold. At the end of the day, Republicans are more harsh towards Arab Americans than the Democratic Party is. And Democrats were still, for the most part, pro-Israel. Not really, though. Republicans are definitely more pro-Israel in general. Trump is certainly very pro-Israel. Thus, I just don't believe that those Arab Americans would stay with the Republican Party. That being said, it does seem like Democrats have some areas to lose in. I also believe that, Gavin Newsom will not do as well in areas like Oakland County. Overall, I'd say the state maybe shifts slightly towards the Democratic Party, but I think that JD Vance has the charisma needed to win the state, and I think that he has the Trump support in the rural areas, combined with a bit more support from moderates. Finally, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is by far the most difficult of the 3 states for Democrats to win in the Rust Belt, and given that I already gave Republicans the other 2, it's not surprising. I also think that JD Vance will win Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the most important state. If Pennsylvania goes red, it's game over for the Democratic Party, period. They need to win not only Wisconsin and Michigan, they also need to win a state like Georgia, and they need to win another state. So this is pretty much a state that Democrats must win. The problem with Democrats in the state is the working class vote. Bucks County, Monroe County, Northampton, the key areas where working class voters are very important, especially in Bucks. These are historically very blue areas. They voted for Obama in 2008 by 15%. Obama in 12, Monroe by 13. Clinton won the county. Biden won the county by 6. Guess what? Kamala Harris lost the county. And that's the issue Democrats consistently face in Monroe County as well as in a lot of working class regions. I believe JD Vance may drop a little bit in the rural areas. However, I just do not believe that someone like Gavin Newsom is moderate enough to win the suburbs. There's also going to be a bit of Democratic loss in a lot of more African American suburban areas around Philadelphia County, which has constantly kind of shifted away from the Democratic Party bit by bit. You see here pretty much shifting about 4% away from the Democratic Party every single election cycle. I expect that to continue. I expect that Gavin Newsom will not have the support needed to win a lot of working class voters in Bucks County. Maybe loses a few moderate Republicans who voted for Kamala Harris in Chester County. Even if Republicans lose a bit in the rural areas, I would say Pennsylvania is leaning towards the Republican Party by about 2.5%. I think JD Vance will gain the state, and that is my prediction. My overall comment is just that I believe JD Vance is favored. Even though Vance is underwater, we all knew that was going to happen. He's doing better than a lot of people, I think, expect. Biden's approval rating by this point of the year was like -10, -15. Trump is doing better than that. I think that really surprises a lot of quote-unquote mainstream politicians and the mainstream media. I think JD Vance has the charisma. You look at the vice presidential debate in 2024, needed to win the election. Therefore, this election, in my opinion, would go for JD Vance. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.